Okay, here we go. You are live. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody, from Boston, 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and North Carolina with Mr. Walter Schultze and the Network Architect channel below me, and all the way live at 5 on the West Coast with Mr. Eric Way of the News Coolum channel. Good evening, everybody. We are Coast to Coast EVs, your once again fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. And just a reminder that the podcast that is audio only goes out on all of your regular platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, et al. From around noon Eastern the following day. So Thursday afternoon, if you have a commute back, you can put us on audio and we'll be happy to fuel your commute in the best possible way, electric only, of course. Let's see here. We are going to get into the news. And it's been a little while since Q1 now, but obviously everybody has some time to digest the numbers and write some articles. And you've obviously had the end of 2023 EV sales going not down, but people saying, they are hitting a plateau. We don't have any momentum. This is the point where EVs hit a bust instead of continuing their upward trend. And others would paint it more as a blip, a temporary plateau as we re-gear and get sales heading in the opposite direction. So our Q1 sales, according to info from Bloomberg, there's some pretty interesting stuff in an article that they released yesterday, I think it was. And I'm going to pop it up on the screen here just so the viewers can see and get rid of the banner. So it's really a story of different brands, and this is kind of, you can take it either way with, if you looked at a Tesla maybe, or a General Motors, who we'll get onto a little bit in a while here, or even a Volkswagen, you can see them for Q1 2024, year over year compared to 2023, down a little bit here. So GM was the highest there. I think that was about 20.5% down over the previous year. Again, first quarter where the Bolt wasn't fully available, still some residual sales from 2023 perhaps, but not very many. Tesla there down about 13%, hitting the Tesla Model 3, the new version of it, that production ramp only just starting, so getting a little bit hit there, but also possibly having a slightly low product roadmap in terms of anything else other than the Cybertruck not being around or too exciting. But then you have the other end here. We've highlighted Ford as the biggest growth year over year, 86.1%, pretty huge obviously there, with a lot of deals on F-150 Lightnings and Marquis. Hyundai Kia over the other side, always kind of come up whenever we need a standard bearer for brands that are kind of killing it with EVs and the design, and obviously the models becoming quite popular. Ioniq 5 myself I know is a good one. Ioniq 6, Kia EV9 coming out recently, winning lots of awards, Kia EV6 being popular. And then the kind of odd one down at the bottom there, this is more, I think, a case of the numbers being very, very low in 2023 and then selling a bunch of BZ4Xs to rideshare drivers in New York the following year, but not to dismiss Toyota doing a little bit of a sterling job there. So I can pop that up whenever anyone wants to speak to a particular brand. But Eric, what are you thinking in terms of how Q1 looked and where it sits in the overall picture of EV sales, blip or bust?
Well, I mean, I think in what was the comment Mike made on there, growing more slowly is not a decline, and I think that's what we do see, is we see that stair stepping up, and we talked about this before, but Q1 is traditionally the slowest quarter of the year for EV sales. Just people aren't getting the tax credits, or just traditionally people don't buy as many EVs in January, February, and March as they do the other 9 months out of the year. So there's already a natural lull in that cycle, and you see it kind of stair stepping up. And I think there's no big surprise that it was Ford, and Ford did well, right? They discounted a lot of their vehicles and really pushed a lot of inventory out the door. They make good EVs. They're good enough, right? They're not top class really in any category, but we've gotten to the point where 300 miles of real world range and the ability to do things in your car and reasonably fast charging speeds is good enough for, a good percentage of the population. So Ford doing well, I think, isn't a surprise. They just need to continue pushing forward and improving. GM obviously had slowdowns with their Ultium deployment, and so losing the Bolt EV, it makes perfect sense that their sales are going to decline. And then Tesla, I think, is the big. I think that's the big mystery for a lot of people, because I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand or wrap their head around how Tesla could be losing market share when a lot of people perceive them to still be the EV leaders. And just in overall numbers, they kind of are. But at a certain point, as more and more competitors come online and more, competent and capable competitors come online, their market share is going to reduce. Their sales aren't going to grow in the same way that they were before, when they were basically the only game in town. Now they have a lot of competition. So like nothing there surprises me. And if anything, I'm kind of optimistic based on those numbers, just knowing what we know about the current economy and current, global, political, pressures that are happening from wars, from, economic downturns. So I look at those numbers and I'm pretty positive just about the amount of growth that we saw in Q1.
Walter, how are you viewing the numbers? And if you want to bring on the May stuff that you had in as well, then all the better.
Sure, yeah. Q1 seemed to be a bit of a downer as it related to EV sales, and there was a lot of press surrounding the EV bubble burst and things like that. The numbers are starting to stack up, though, and even though Q1 was a bad quarter for Tesla, which constitutes a large portion of the overall EV market, as was pointed out, many other established OEMs were starting to produce EVs in serial production in pretty large quantities and starting to make up some of the slack that Tesla has with their problem. I don't really know what to call what's going on with Tesla right now. It's a bit of an enigma to me because they do make solid products, and the supercharger network is still closed to a certain extent, except for Ford and Rivian. So they still have that distinguishing thing. But one thing that kind of pointed out to me as of late is Ford e-Transit is up over 100% in year over year from this time, since this time last year, which says that there are fleet customers which are still ignoring this whole concept that EVs are, headed towards the history pile. Is the economics that are driving this. And so the e-Transit, the Bright Drop, Mercedes e-Sprinter, which is now getting produced in South Carolina, are all starting to get produced in serial production in large numbers, and there's a significant demand. They're selling every single one that they could make. And to me, that is encouraging to bode well for EVs as a whole, because the concept of EVs as, a political statement or a personal life choice and all these things really boils down, in my opinion, to economics. If you could tip the American household budget by introducing a product that increases quality of life and decreases their expenses, it's going to sell. And I think we're there. The number of EVs that are coming out, especially the Equinox and a few others that are beginning to hit serial production at lower than median prices, is starting to have an awakening effect for the masses. And once Tommy needs to get to soccer practice and mom realizes that she could do so less expensively in an EV, in a more reliable car, they're going to sell. And I think the word is starting to get out. So the numbers in Q1 were a little bit bogged down. We are seeing in Q2 some really remarkable numbers getting posted. Mary Barra mentioned in I think it was a shareholders meeting last night, reported by the Detroit Free Press, that it was the largest number of EVs sold in a single month by General Motors ever. Now, they took the Bolt out. So that means the Lyriq, the Hummer, the Silverado, and the Blazer and the Bright Drop have made up the losses of the Bolt in no one predicted it would be this fast. So that says that they're doing something right, and it's not a lack of demand.
Go ahead, Eric. The Bolt is always
yeah,
most popular impressions.
I was going to say, I mean, I think Walter, some people saw that coming, but but I was going to say too, yeah, that commercial fleet I feel like is a big blind spot for a lot of us, because what you see primarily reported on is the consumer market, right? The private owner market, and it's easy to overlook that a lot of these automakers get most of their sales from fleet customers, right? And so if you're putting these cargo vans out, trucks for, you know, construction companies or rental companies, you're going to be moving a lot of these vehicles that private parties might not be able to afford or be willing to spend that money on. But you did remind me too of another blind spot, and maybe, I don't know, Steve, you'd speak to this as well. The one blip on that quarter marker that surprised me was Nissan, because it just seems like they're not going anywhere. I know they have the Aria, and I believe they still have the Nissan Leaf, whether it's being produced or not fully, is an affordable EV that's for sale. And so for them to just be static, and I know people have complained that the Aria was overpriced, but you know, compared to some of the other offerings on the market, I mean, it seems perfectly capable. You know, there's nothing wrong with it that I could see that would prompt me to think that it isn't deserving of more sales and more attention. So that's the one. I just don't know what's going on with Nissan.
I mean, for me, it's just they don't lead on anything anymore. They're awash in that sector of the mid-price 40 to 60K crossover, you know, normal crossover or medium-sized crossover. And then the Leaf is, although it's still, you know, the only EV under 30K, that's for the 40 kilowatt hour pack, which brings you below 200 miles of range, which charges on a standard that's leaving the stage. None of that's compelling. I think the Aria is a really nice looking vehicle. It's just, it came 2 years too late. It was one of the first ones announced, you know, back in 2020, and never made its market before the ID4, the Mustang Mach-E, the Ioniq 5, the EV6. Should we continue the list? You know, it goes for a long time. But I think, you know, Walter and I spoke to Chase over at Grid Connections on the podcast, which I linked in the comments there, and I'll put in the description for anyone who's catching this later. But we did have a conversation. You know, one of the things I mentioned yesterday before Walter had sent across the news on the Lyriq was that I'm seeing a lot more of them locally. It's around here. It would have been a kind of vehicle I would have expected to see, because we have Cadillac dealers. It's relatively affluent. You know, it's not through the roof, but certainly enough that Teslas are very popular. We saw a lot of Model S and Model X before the Model 3 was released, and it's a popular vehicle now. It just seems like it was that production. So there's some pent up demand, and maybe that flooded into Q1 and Q2. But it'll be really interesting to see kind of where GM goes with that. And I'd point everyone to the Grid Connections podcast, because we did talk a lot about where sales are, similar kind of topic, and you know, what we expect to see in the next few months here.
Yeah, the exact number is imprecise, but it's rounding to be somewhere around 3,000 for the month of May, from what I understand, for Lyriq sales. And if you think of a Spartan Model Y or a cream puff Cadillac Lyriq, I think a lot of people are going to cough up the extra $10,000 to upgrade into a Lyriq. And I think a lot of people are starting to make that decision and see the connection and the expansive dealer network and the brand behind it and everything. So it seems to have caught its stride, if nothing else.
Just to underscore the point here, there's another graph from that same article in Bloomberg, looking forward to, it actually puts Q4 here, but it's trying to compare the rough level of figures and where they'll be for the previous 12 months. So 2024, it's putting us around 1.4 million. And then 2025, that's actually a IEA forecast, not a Bloomberg New Energy, but then they put us at 2.5 million. So it just kind of reinforces, they haven't changed these other than up and down maybe a few percent in terms of what the growth figure will be. But it kind of reinforces your point, Walter, that we make week after week. It seems that the sales and the projections are still on track. People aren't, the people that know, or the people that are in the business of providing analytics, data, and forecasting aren't reversing these numbers. If anything, they're getting a little more aggressive. And it's really the noise around each individual quarter or a specific make or model that is the real kind of drag on EV news in general.
And if I could point out something that Sky Malcolm just put into the chat concerning the cost of commercial fleets, there was an article indicating school buses were getting purchased with EPA tax credits for somewhere around $300,000, and normally they cost $100,000, so that's $200,000 more. And you think, wow, that's really expensive. But they were doing the math on it, and they're recouping their expense as a result of the cost of diesel versus electricity in a pretty short amount of time. So not only is it at parity with diesel with the improved environmentals for school buses, but it's also actually better over time monetarily to operate a school bus fleet that's electrified.
Yeah, and you're getting a lot of pushback from parents as well, because they don't want their kids sitting in a bus breathing diesel fumes for 30 minutes to an hour a day. Yeah, there's
where do they queue up? Where do they idle? You know, I've done the
Yeah.
school pickup many times, and they idle right in front of the entrance. So it's
Yes.
parents who are there waiting for the kids. Often they've got babies and, you know, strollers. Been there, done it. It's not a pretty thing to have in your air.
Yeah, they could be $500,000 and they would be worth it, like compared to the costs of the health costs. So
yeah, it goes back to the economics that it is an improvement quality of life and it's a decrease in cost. I mean, this is really going to be difficult to come up with a scenario where it doesn't take off.
So, Walter, you kindly took us to the comments, and that's exactly where I'm going now to run through the good evening to everybody. If you haven't popped where you are and what you drive, and we don't know just from talking to you before, please let us know. But as Walter mentioned, Sky Malcolm is in the chat here. Howdy. I believe West Coast now, somewhere in SoCal, but previously of Ohio, and certainly a veteran road tripper. So all kinds of stories we can get from Sky if he's willing to share. Mike Mahan is back from Europe. Thank you for all the pictures, Mike. I super appreciate seeing Austria and France and all the places you've been. It was my visit was too short, so I have to go back, I guess. Mike's in SoCal, as we know. Good evening to Todd Capuz. Good evening to Crazy Postman. Great channel, worth going to watch out in Oklahoma, I believe, maybe Kansas. Not sure which one.
Yeah, he's getting a new car too.
Oh, yeah? Okay. That's another thing to go and check out. I'm obviously not caught up. Leonard, similar area, I believe, if you can remind me. I think Oklahoma. Testing my memory, though. Good evening, Mr. Elderon from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Certainly an area I'll be back through this summer. As Mike said, growing more slowly is not a decline. That is pretty much the nature of our story there and the takeaway, I think. Chase Drum over at Grid Connections, I mentioned, definitely worth going to check out that podcast, not just for us, but some really interesting guests. He was on here a few months back, and a lot of people in the industry are connecting with Chase, so good insights over there on the Grid Connections podcast. Andy Getch down in Fort Myers, Florida, Marquee driver, looking forward to more charging options and smaller gaps, aren't we all? And that is the next wave, so maybe I should have saved that. But thank you for commenting. Jed, Tesla is Elon politics blowback. Possibly hard to deny that. I was going to put it down more to benefit of the doubt on Model 3 ramping, but when you see how much the Model Y is kind of their largest crutch of sales, then it's tough to say the Model 3 would have by itself kind of brought them back in Q1. So I may have to agree with you there. Got a lot of comments here, so thank you everybody for putting stuff in. I'll try and race through, and then we'll get to the meat of the subjects. And Ariel Batista in Jacksonville, Florida. Issues are high interest rates and the economy, but I'm seeing far more EVs on the road. Absolutely. I mean, we should be addressing interest rates here soon, hopefully. I'm not sure how the economy will react based on different things I've read, but certainly it's something that Q1, as Eric said, is the traditional weak quarter, and Q2, Q3 should be interesting to watch. Let's see. So Crazy Postman brings us on to that side topic there that we had, and I think that's worth lingering on for a second before we get into the fast charging. Do you really think people are not going to buy a Tesla just because of who the CEO is? That sounds silly to me. I have my own thoughts, but let's see. Walter, what are your initial thoughts on that?
To me, it doesn't matter, but I have specifically spoken to people who said they will not buy a Tesla because of Elon Musk. And it's not just one, and it's not just two. They're fine with EVs. They don't mind EVs. They just will not buy a Tesla. So I have heard that. I'll leave it at that.
And he also follows up there. Crazy Postman, the country is pretty much 50-50 right now. So people that are deciding not to buy one on one side, he's picking up from the other side. I guess the only thing I would say with that is that the original crowd of Tesla was very heavily on Eric's side of the country and to some extent my side of the country. And although we often say this isn't about politics, there are swathes of folks who are potentially anti-EV that may not come over just because they're not in the EV camp at all. So I don't know that you'll necessarily win back. But again, I wouldn't put it 50-50 in any way for EVs at least, because it's really hard to divide out EVs by politics. You can obviously say the messages coming down from the top when it comes to this podcast alone. We're all pretty different parts of the political spectrum, I would imagine, certainly different parts of the country, and we all drive EVs and advocate for them. So it's a tough argument to make that it's easy to slice down that line. Eric, any input before we switch over to charging? And
yeah, I mean, no, I think there's certainly an impact that Tesla or that Elon has had on Tesla's sales. And I think I don't know that I necessarily agree that it's even political. I think it's some people who find him offensive won't buy from him. And I know a lot of people who would be on the other side of the spectrum, extremely liberal, who weren't going to buy a Tesla, and now they feel like they see Elon sort of under attack, and so they went out of their way to buy a Tesla. So, but I definitely think that his being the figurehead is polarizing, somewhat along political lines, but it goes even beyond that, because I think most of the hot button issues where he's gotten himself embroiled aren't really political. It just happens that they're kind of nudging on one side of politics or the other. But I think there were already some issues with Tesla to begin with. And then I think with Elon just kind of piling onto that, it exacerbated it. And I think the fact that you now have competent competitors where you didn't 2 to 3 years ago makes that a whole lot more impactful. So I think we're seeing like a coalescing of a lot of different impacts, but I do think that had Elon like stayed sort of like anodyne and out of the limelight, I think Tesla sales would be a lot higher than they are right now. Like as Walter said, I know specifically some people who have said I won't buy a Tesla now because of Elon, where I never would have heard that 2 years ago.
And to link the two, I mean, the reason the site, I put it much more down to product roadmap personally. I think the Model 3 is what it is. That's a perfectly solid vehicle. The Model Y, it was always going to sell like hotcakes, but that's it. And they look the same, essentially. As far as design goes, there hasn't been anything particularly new and exciting out of Tesla since those vehicles, and the Cybertruck only counts in the sense that it's a kind of niche product, we'll say that. We've been over the product itself and what it does for the industry, but it's unlikely that it's going to ramp this year, and it's even more unlikely based on what we've seen in the intervening period since launch that it's going to be a high volume seller, as far as I can see, unless they really change the specs and get back to what they promised initially. So to me, it kind of mirrors Europe a little bit, what happened even before Elon had any kind of really polarizing views kind of pre-pandemic, that Europe went this direction to a much more diverse marketplace a lot earlier than the US and North America did. And the sales evened out. Tesla was 60-70% there for a good while, and then they had that gap where they didn't really have the Model Y in play. Only the Model 3 was available, and a lot of other makers, between Volkswagen having the ID3, ID4 out a little bit quicker, Renault being over there and getting models out. There was a lot more competition over there more quickly. MG, just a bunch of what we're seeing now in the US, with not just manufacturers coming out with their one EV that looks really good, but they're getting a stable of these. You see Hyundai, Kia, you see General Motors, you see even Ford to an extent starting to put these stables together of very competent, desirable EVs, and together, of course, that's going to eat away at market share. There's people who are loyalists to these brands. And as Walter and I talked about yesterday on the podcast with Grid Connections, this is pre-Honda, Honda Prologue, pre-Toyota getting their act together, which you have to assume they will at some point. No Acura, no Subaru, really. A lot of these aren't getting up to speed yet. When they do, that's potentially more market share away.
Well, one other thing I would say about Tesla is, too, they are possibly the most American brand. And you can take that as both a good thing and a bad thing. And I feel like a lot of their design is catering to American tastes, which aren't necessarily global tastes, and they're not necessarily European tastes. But even then, I'm not sure that they're American tastes. They're a subset of American tastes, right? But when you get down to brass tacks, a lot of Americans don't want a car that does 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. They don't want like a speed demon. They don't want a low roof sedan. I remember hearing, Walter, you were mentioning that one of the big differences for you getting into the Lyric coming from the Model 3 is how much easier it is to get in and out of, because it's a low car, right? And I think we're seeing that where a lot of car buyers are like, wait a minute, you mean I can step into a car, right? I can get into it easily, get out of it easily. Maybe it's not the fastest, right? So I think even maybe American tastes are shifting too. But to your point about Europe, I think they were already different. They don't necessarily need 300 miles on a battery charge. They don't need it to charge to 80% in 30 minutes. They don't need it to, do 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 in a few seconds, right? So European tastes might have already deviated from the Tesla design strategy for their vehicles. So
European tastes are certainly deviant. I agree. I think that's what you're saying. I assume.
Quote me on it.
Another one of those nuclear bomb little sound bites that I'll pull out of context. So finishing up the greetings here, and then we can move on to charging. Steve Lonlinks from Massachusetts, my home, took first road trip to Augusta, Maine in a 2020 Kona EV. Perfect. Lovely part of the world. Really nice little jaunt up there. And Revision Energy, worth a call out there. And Efficiency Maine for doing a great job, at least in the south and middle of the state, getting charging in place for non-Tesla EVs. Scott Goslin, good evening from Central Illinois. Sorry, I'm behind on these, but the intros are a little bit split up here. Brian Ribby out in Minnesota, good evening. Great to see some of his videos up recently. And I think that is everybody. No, I've got one more who I have to shout out because he's a long-time friend from Ohio, which is part of our topics later. Mark Fitzpatrick, welcome to the chat and thanks for joining. Okay, there's lots of stuff on charging here, and I think we'll start it off with 8 DC fast charging sites does not equal $5 billion.
Really?
This is some basic math that I'm hoping, I may be overestimating our reach here, but the reports that come from the mainstream press may have you believe, and I'm sure most of you can see through the smoke and mirrors that they're trying to pull, that the $5 billion that was allotted for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program is what went to the 8 currently activated DC fast charging sites across 6 states. That is not the case. The 5 billion is a budget for the next 5 years, or at least last year, and then the next 4, I believe. So that will be allocated over the ones that they've built so far. On average, that you're looking at around $500,000, maybe $600,000 for a charging site, depending on the provider and the network. But if you extrapolate that out, we are in the low millions, not the high billions. So just something to be aware of. But it does bring us on to our topic tonight of DC fast charging, what Walter is seeing specifically in terms of construction numbers, what's been built, what's emanating out of his area. We have a bunch of topics to discuss, but the kind of underlying theme is there a boom in DC fast charging brewing here? Do we have something that is about to explode out from the negative headlines again of taking the few little pieces that they can and the start of a very long-term plan and process to criticize electric vehicles? But very soon here, will we have so many dots on the map for NEVI and for everything else that it's really hard to deny that there is a lot of momentum behind this DC fast charging nationwide. So Walter, I think, again, if we can start with you and you can take it wherever you'd like to take it.
Gladly. So a couple of things. First, I'd like to point out that I look in the alternative fuels data center data set once a week and do a quick synopsis of the new ones. And even though the entire supercharger team was let go, there has not been a week where there has not been new supercharger sites activated. In fact, I just checked yesterday, and this coming week, the numbers are again increasing. So whatever slowdown there was with the supercharger implementation as a result of the dismissal of the team is ending, and the momentum is again returning to normal levels. I've seen on LinkedIn people getting their Tesla badges returned to them and coming back. So yes, there is going to be some fallout and decreased headcount and everything, but the supercharger network is on track to continue their relentless implementation schedule. At least that's my view. Number one. Number two, Mercedes-Benz charging network in Buc-ee's has announced a phase 2. And it looks like they're targeting the state of Texas. And I believe what's going on there, I could be wrong, but I think they just did a large purchase of charge point equipment, and they installed it all, and then they assessed where they were, and then they purchased another large batch of charge point equipment, and they said, okay, well, where we're going to put these, and they put a bunch of pin drops in, and they're getting ready to do phase 2. And the exact locations are still unclear, but we do know that there are coming soon locations spread throughout the state of Texas at Buc-ee's locations. I haven't heard of any Simon Mall locations yet. Electrify America also is continuing expanding. I'm not tracking them with my updates because they're updates into the data set that I use to perform my updates. I went through earlier today and I was looking at Electrify America, and it looks like they do it in mass. So like 30 sites they'll put into the data set all at once. And so they must do it like once every 6 months or something like that. But I can see in PlugShare that Electrify America is continuing in expansion. Pilot Flying J has gone completely off the rails with their spend. I can't imagine what their budget looks like, but it's got to be carte blanche, because right now I have 41 locations spotted under construction. They opened a new site last night. It was Cordele, Georgia, I believe is where it is. It's an important site in between Greenville, South Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia. There's kind of a blank spot of Interstate 85, and they put a pin drop right in the middle there. And there was 3 locations very close to each other, and I knew they were going to put it somewhere. I just didn't know exactly where. And last night we found out which pilot location it was. It opened up. So 41 sites spotted under construction, 39 sites open, and their target is 200 by December 31st. And I had my doubts early on, but my doubts are quickly starting to be dispelled. If they continue at this pace, they will hit 200 by December 31st, assuming utility is delivered to these locations in a reasonable amount of time. Several other networks are starting to expand as well. EVgo is starting to build with the GM initiative. I'm not quite sure what kind of funding is being extended from General Motors. So there is all of that occurring. And then there's the IANA topic, which I think we're going to touch at a later point.
So from our perspective, Eric, East Coast, with the possible exception of that little gap between central Maine and the Canadian border, looks very good. How are you seeing the map starting to populate out there? What are you excited about? What do you want to see? Bearing in mind also that NEVI, I think the NEVI awards for California are imminent. I think they announced some stuff, but it's on the tip of their tongues.
Yeah, I feel like, and I think part of it is, it's the benefit, there aren't many, but one of the benefits of living in California is they know it's an EV mecca. And I think we get first dibs on a lot of the charging that goes in. And I feel like every time I turn around, I'm getting slapped in the face again with a new charging site that's gone on. So I did that video not too long ago where I wanted to check that J3400 update to that charge point site at the 7-Eleven, technically under the 7-Eleven 7 charge umbrella, but really under charge point. And I didn't even think there's a Maverick Adventures First Stop, another travel plaza going in, and we have them going in all over the place in California. It's getting a couple of free wire chargers. BP Pulse is just building, right? Like, so, and then of course, one of the things that I've noticed with EV Go, that original deal pre GM Energy Flying J, there were 3,200 chargers supposed to be going in across like 50 plus metro regions. Well, a lot of those metro regions are in California. And you can again reference Walter does a great job of covering this with his AFDC data dumps. But there are a number of multi-stall EV Go stations going in lots of the cities surrounding San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, the greater parts of Southern California. So we're having massive build outs. And then we have the Electrify America mega sites going on. So we have the one that everybody knows about in San Francisco. There's another one that's going in Santa Barbara. That's another one of those mega sites that they promoted for a while. So it's the growth here in California has been massive. I don't know that I agree that it's necessarily where it needs to be, because I live in Northern California, which is still very disadvantaged and very much overlooked by the state and a lot of funding. But once you get south of about, Chico City in Northern California, you start seeing a lot more growth across the board in terms of networks. And I do think the one big thing, and I keep seeing this in the news, and I don't know what kind of an impact it's going to have, is everybody's talking about the copper shortages, copper prices increasing, and whether or not, to me, the big concern is with the power grid and the power drops and the transformers that are required. So that pilot Flying J GM Energy EV Go site that I went and looked at in Weed, Northern California, it's literally one exit down from a Tesla V4 supercharger that just opened. And construction on both of those sites were done at the same time. And apparently the local power company already had the transformer for the EV Go site. And somehow or another, the Tesla site got powered up, but we're still waiting on word for the EV Go site at the pilot. So it just doesn't, like, there seems to be some sort of disconnect when the actual grid power is going in, when the transformers are getting dropped in the ground. And that might be the single biggest holdup for the growth of the EV chargers, at least from what I'm seeing. But outside of that, it's getting hard to take an exit off of a freeway in California and not see at least one or two DC fast charging sites.
So a point that dovetails with that, both Leonard and Crazy Postman touch on here. Who are BP Pulse's vendors if FreeWire and Tritium are kaput? FreeWire is trying to get pulled out the other side, basically. So they're in quiet mode at the moment, but I don't know that they are 100% kaput. I'm sure there's enough base there that there's going to be something worth pulling out, but also they have Tesla's hardware, right? They've been one of the first to sign on for, I can't remember exactly the number, but they were looking at white labeled Tesla superchargers.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of funding going to FreeWire from BP, and I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but perhaps FreeWire will become the hardware of choice for BP Pulse after, as you say, some kind of reorg or something. But I knew there was some kind of funding associated with that, and that's probably why BP was using them.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
mean, go ahead.
I was going to say too, a lot of the sites where I see these FreeWire units going in, it's exactly the opposite of what I was saying with needing the upgrades to the grid utilities, because they're just able to drop them right in at a convenience store or a gas station. And the time it takes from when they lay those foundations and run the conduits to when those units are powered up is very short compared to what I'm seeing with a lot of the other providers. And I don't know that Tesla's equipment is going to help that, because it's going to require a power drop just like everybody else's, even if BP is doing it. So I FreeWire has a really good space in the market if they can just figure out, their business.
There are some others as well coming in, though. I mean, I don't know, regardless of what happens to FreeWire, in terms of the NEVI awards, I know Joule, which is also sometimes listed as eCamion, they have a battery integrated solution. Electric Era, I think, is starting to gain some pace. They picked up one of the guys from Circle K's charging team not too long ago. So those, there are solutions out there that are there to look at the bridging that interconnection delay gap and the utility problem. They haven't won at scale yet, so none of them are on the size of a Francis Energy or a Ready Charge really coming up. But the likes of BP Pulse, the likes of Loves, the ones who haven't necessarily committed to a vendor yet, or at least we don't know that they've committed to a vendor. There are vendors there who would probably be more than willing to step in and be that third party. And then we have kind of related topic, and on the topic of sleeper sites too. Mike asks, is there a deadline for states to announce NEVI funds? How many states are still pending? I do have an update plan for that. My schedule got all thrown out the last couple of weeks for various reasons, but I do have the numbers, and I did bring up a little map which kind of emphasizes what Chase and Anthony, who are in the Pacific Northwest, were talking about on the West Coast versus East Coast. There's about, I think it's 15 states at the moment that haven't even got to the RFP phase, but then there's a bunch of big ones out there like your California's, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, who are still in the just about to finish their solicitations. But even with the sites the states that have announced right now, we've got 500, more than 500. I think it might be at 530 now, site awards. So all of these locations here are the states that have announced, and we know where those pins are going in. So you can see here the kind of stretch it is when we talk about coast to coast EVs. Once you get California in there, if Nevada drops in there, then you've got a pretty clear coast to coast stretch. Illinois as well, but you can see that gap on the West Coast where it's Washington, Oregon for Chase and Anthony just still doing a lot of waiting. California is a lot more complex in terms of alternative fuel corridors and having this massive groundswell of chargers already in the ground, so they probably have a lot more work to do there to figure out where they're really going to be the most bang for your buck. But I think this map kind of gives you an idea of there's a lot going on, and it puts the lie to that, $5 billion for next to nothing. It's all happening. It's in this kind of category as Walter sees on a slightly smaller scale for the Pilot Flying J. They're out there and they pop up, and if you're looking at PlugShare, you're seeing a lot of action. It's just not a big press release. It's not a big launch just yet. But this is why the topic of this one is there a looming boom for DCFC? Is all that we're talking about here, all of these different private projects, federally funded projects, all the state funds, which we haven't even got into. Is that going to be enough to, over the next 6 to 12 months, fire up a boom in DC fast charging that will add to this kind of EV sales topic that we've talked about? And we're not seeing problems on the EV sales side long term. Is the DC fast charging going to follow that same trick?
I would like to give kudos to Eric for calling out that NEVI is actually a bit of a wet blanket, because it causes a bit of an Osborne effect with the implementation schedule of CPOs who are making determination on where to spend their money and put in their capital and send their crews, because they're unsure if they're going to be awarded funding or not. And so really there was a bit of a pause while everyone was sorting through, where these awards are going to be made and where they're not going to be made and who's going to get money and should we build, should we not build. And I'm definitely seeing that in data where with the main CPO that I track, which is Pilot Flying J, they are strategically not doing builds in sites that haven't announced awards. If they announce awards and Pilot Flying J doesn't receive them, they're fine. They just go ahead and build their own sites. But they're just not sure if they're going to be awarded the money or not, so they can't proceed. So it's a bit of a blocker.
I was going to say, I think that was Chase maybe that mentioned that on Grid Connections. He made a comment about that or a question about that. So, yeah. So, and I definitely agree. We saw a massive slowdown, right? The deployment of chargers right before like the NEVI announcements started going out, the money started to get allocated. And then some of them, I don't know if it was directly related or not. ChargeNet was another big one here in California that I was expecting them to be putting more money in, and then they just didn't, right? So I think the only two, maybe, three CPOs that really didn't slow down, public-wise anyway, were ChargePoint, EVgo, and Electrify America. And they're the ones that, like you mentioned, Walter, if they get the funding for those GM Energy sites, great. If they don't, they're building them anyway. So, right, like, so, and then, of course, ChargePoint getting funding from Mercedes, and then Electrify America, I think, not even being eligible for the NEVI funding directly until later.
I was going to ask if EA, as a result of their charter, is forbidden from receiving NEVI funds or not, because it seems like they're not even applying for it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that's the case. I don't know.
The only place they've been allowed is through their relationship with the New York Power Authority. So they've got slid in under those what we called sleeper sites briefly, but they're not anywhere else now. Yeah,
it's almost like it's okay if they're doing it as a partnership and aiding someone else, but they're not seeking the funding for themselves yet. So, and then, I didn't want to lose this because it's been in the news and I forgot to mention it earlier. And I'm going to give credit where credit is due. As much as I like to razz on Toyota is starting to fund EVgo sites as well. So they're kind of jumping on board. And we kind of saw this already at the LA Auto Show when you went to the Toyota electrified section. They had EVgo dispensers up, sort of prominently placed, and it was kind of like hinting at that. And now they're actually directly funding sites. So it looks like EVgo has another patron. So between GM and Toyota, they should be getting a lot of funding for their sites that goes on beyond the NEVI funding.
So there's a bunch of questions, and I think the map may have brought people's interest in the area out. But Mark Berenger asks, anything planned for I-79 in West Virginia? I can say that in terms of NEVI, they are back at the back. They're not quite as bad as Wyoming, who completely said we don't have enough EVs, go pound sand to the consultation process. But West Virginia is definitely in that category of laggards. Walter, you've been over there. I don't know. I've looked at PlugShare for that area recently. Anything for I-79 specifically?
Yes, the best hope is the Tesla supercharger network opening, because there's superchargers on 79 in West Virginia. So once that happens, there will at least be supercharger access. And really, that's it. It is a wasteland for EVs in West Virginia. It is really tough country. There are some builds plans, but no soil has been turned, and very sparse. It is a tough place to get through.
Any Pilot Flying J locations?
There's two that are on the build schedule, but none of them have seen any form of construction. And I don't know if they're purposefully waiting, but there has been some getting close to West Virginia. So at least they're encroaching towards West Virginia. There's one coming from Virginia, in Northern Virginia, in what's called Winchester, that's kind of getting closer there. And there's one in Kentucky that's coming in from the other side. So I think they might start to be at least considering sending crews out there.
I'm cranking back through the comments to make sure I didn't miss anything. Leonard touched on the point that we talked about with NEVI and its interaction with private DC fast charging rollout. It's been excruciatingly slow going. I would love to discuss how the slow rollout may actually be stifling DC charging rollout. I think some of that was there, just to put my 2 cents in, but I think the larger part of it is, and you can see this with California, who you would think would be very eager to roll out charging as fast as possible, is that some areas, there's two ends of it. Assuming you have an interest in putting in EV charging, which most of the states, or at least 2/3 do, you have a desire to get it right as well. There are some places where it's going to be much more complicated than others, and probably the Pacific Northwest and California, because of their existing legacy infrastructure that rolled out 10 years ago now, is obviously a 50 kilowatt charger isn't good enough, but maybe those sites can be upgraded. And we're seeing from the first swathe of 8 or 10 under construction NEVI sites, there's a mix of brand new sites going in that were never going to be built otherwise, some that were probably aligned, as Pilot Flying J did, with some of their locations and could get funding for because they were on key gaps, and some that are just old sites, 50 kilowatt hardware in the ground. We've got one of these down in fact, I think I can bring it up here. I think I put a video in down in Rhode Island, which is about to activate its first NEVI station very soon. This place is a park and ride on the border with Connecticut, sorry. Geography.
Yeah, you got a video of it.
Yeah, this is before the
Right. There's
current
two
install.
CPE 250s, but it
Yeah,
looks like
these
they
are
just put in two ChargePoint Express Pluses.
Yeah, these were installed with the Dieselgate money back in 2020, and this is what
Yeah.
it looks like now.
Look at that. There they are.
Yeah, so
Wow.
that's going to qualify for NEVI funding and is going to be the one of the first in Rhode Island for that program, and that's where they've probably looked at it. And in some cases, that's going to speed it up. In others, I think I think other states will have said that's not a site where you want fast charging. To me, there's good things about that. It's convenient. It's really right next to the interstate, but there's no amenities there. There's nothing. There's not even a porta potty to go and hopefully you're charging fast, because you'll need to get on the road and go to the next service area.
I saw some trees in a dumpster.
I mean, if there's options if you're a certain persuasion, but if you have more high standards, it's going to be a problem. So so that I think speaks to some states are willing to do that, and Vermont has done that as well with an old site. But I think other states, California is probably going to be a little more picky about what they roll out and some of their permitting requirements. Maybe we can talk around that a little bit, in that I think NEVI will have catalyzed in some senses, but also held us up from sites we may have had active for this summer.
Well, and I was going to say too, Steve, like with that NEVI funding, there are still those specific requirements about interstates and coverage gaps, right, in terms of the funding. And California is sort of unique in the sense that not only does it have very few interstates for the size of the geography of the state, it already has a lot of fast charging that's been installed. And so you're running into this sort of double gap where even though the state is 400 miles across or 500 miles across in some sections, there might only be a single interstate running north to south through that section. And so, yeah, I think literally north of the Bay Area, it's I-5 and that's it. And so you have this huge chunk of real estate with very few interstates that's already populated with fast chargers. So,
right. And the amount of money that's going to California is going to be significantly larger, right? So they may be, whereas a lot of the states have just said, well, if we put a pin in the map and get 4 chargers or 4 ports in, that's good enough because there was nothing there before. Anything's an improvement. For California, that may be, well, we need 8 stalls, 10 stalls. We need to build something that is more significant and really burgeons the stuff that's already there, rather than just putting another band-aid for 2 or 3 years.
Well, and in that, if anyone from CARB is listening, I would just like to put out the idea that we already have a massive number of California Energy Commission grant-funded sites that, to your point, Steve, they went in as 50 kilowatt. Those would be perfect candidates for a NEVI upgrade to an existing site.
Just some stuff on the I-5 there as well. Crazy Postman says the Flying J site near him And Oklahoma has been waiting for a transformer for 10 months. So there you're seeing the other side of the equation. If you don't have that battery, drop it in right away, then you have to maybe at the liberty or at the whim of whoever's supplying your hardware.
And I will say that if you're a property owner and you're building it on your own property, like Pilot Flying J, Circle K, 7-Eleven, Racetrack, Circle K, I'm sorry, Quick Trip, a few others, you have the advantage that your business license isn't going to be held up with local authorities. You just have the permitting for the electrical utility. Your guest last week really did a great job enlightening, or 2 weeks ago, enlightening on the whole bogged down with permitting processes. That was a really good episode. I enjoyed listening to it. Sorry I couldn't attend. But if you're a property owner, you kind of negate that because you already have a business license to operate in the municipality. So you get to skip that one, get a free pass on that.
Let's see. Let me jump back to the comments here. Sky gives us some background on Ohio, with the second round of NEVI likely to drop at a public meeting in Columbus, June 18th. I think they had the second round. Are we talking third round maybe? Because the second round did a lot of, first round was last year and that was a lot of EV Go. Second round, I think, had a bunch of Francis Energy and propelled them to the top of the leaderboard in terms of number of sites awarded. So if they're getting third round, that will be 3 rounds of awards within the year, I think. So it's about 11 months ago they announced. So Ohio is kind of leading the pack on that. In terms of others being asleep at the wheel, I think, again, just emphasize, some are very close to putting these on the board. Others are just going to lag behind. But I think when you look at that map overall, you're going to see it's going to become very clear the states that didn't do anything, and it's going to be a little bit embarrassing. I mean, in terms of Wyoming, which their justification was that they only have 87 EVs sold in Q1 or something. Well, there's only 29,000 cars there sold there every year, and the state is half the size of Rhode Island. So you just start to see some of these areas where, yes, they're behind, but also it's not going to make that much difference. Even in Wyoming's case, I think actually Walter, Pilot Flying J, has got things going in on the board there. So even if we don't get NEVI funding for these things, I think the others will be able to step in and say, look, if we need to open a site in Casper or in somewhere up in North Dakota or South Dakota, we can do that to bridge a gap.
Yeah, why would you turn away free money in order to help attract people driving through your state to stop and spend money?
Well, that's also the thing that they've completely missed, and shows really how some of these states just are asleep at the wheel. But they're talking about who ownership in their state, right? Vehicle EV ownership isn't that high. Well, these are people coming through your state, and they may want to stop in your state and spend some time there. Well, they're not going to. If if a lot of owners go electric, I'm driving through Colorado. I'm probably driving through Colorado.
Yeah, going around them. Exactly.
I was going to give a shout out too over to Jordan over at Out of Spec. Was driving his Cybertruck back through Wyoming, and it was kind of a good illustration of how much work Electrify America has been doing, because he was basically able to skip the superchargers and charging at 330 kilowatts in his Cybertruck, going down I-80, charging at Electrify America stations in Wyoming, which wasn't open a year ago. Right. So, yeah, Electrify America, I think, has opened up Wyoming quite a bit. And then if the Pilot Flying J's can open up a few strategic sites in Wyoming, the number of travelers that pass through, that might be sufficient for a state with that population and that geography. So
Bob Malin asks, any charges on US 2 across Montana? I'll go and take a look. And in the meantime, we can talk about the long-term outlook for DC fast charging. I think we touched on this a little bit, but once we move through NEVI and just assume that that's going to be part of a wider rollout that is going to start to blanket the nation, how do you both see it keeping up with EV adoption? We've said that it's going to be 1.5 million, maybe 2.5 million to 3 million by 2025, end of 2025. Do you see what's being added at the moment as just the start of it, or once we get these in place that we know what plans are out there and who's trying to put all these in, is that going to be sufficient for the next 2 to 3 years of the EV adoption we're projecting?
Well, if you want me to go first, I am a contrarian on this issue. I actually think we are at very great risk of overbuilding our DC fast charging network. And part of the reason I think that is I think we've front loaded a massive amount of demand because we know that early adopters for EV owners tend to be more affluent. They tend to be able to travel more. They have more free time. And so these longer road trips that we're seeing as the norm right now in electric vehicles just aren't the norm. And I time and time again, when I spoke to new Bolt EV owners, they were like, I never charge away from home. I never charge away from home. I never charge away from home. And same with Kona Electric and Nero EV. Once people started getting these 200 to 250 mile range EVs, they're just like, why would you ever waste your time? Like, just pull into your garage and you're done. And I think we're going to start seeing that percentage of the EV adoption increase as we get into the early majority and late majority of EV adopters. Is it's going to be mostly people who just don't fuel away from home very often. They don't drive 200 to 300 miles a day very often. And so I do think that we could be hitting a point where we overbuild with EV charging, which might still be fine because it will be enough to handle the surges during weekend traffic, high traffic or travel days. I think the biggest area where we could see a shortfall would be specifically in the rideshare services. Outside of that, though, I think on interstates, in rural areas, outside of big cities, I see what's already in the pipeline being sufficient for maybe a 50 to 75% market penetration for EVs.
Really? That sounds like
contrarian.
No, it sounds optimistic or visionary, depending on your which
Or
side
just
of
crazy.
Walter, you pour over these reports every week. Is Eric crazy?
I definitely respect his perspective. I found it to be more often than not accurate. So I'm not quite sure. I'm having a hard time agreeing. I was at a Buc-ee's doing a site visit video, and I happened upon a drone pilot who was there for Mercedes-Benz construction team doing drone pictures of the site as well. And he shared some pictures with me. And one of them was the drone looking at the Buc-ee sign. Now, I know this sounds a little off topic, but it's not. And when I got that video, I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's a great picture. And down below was the interstate with 3 lanes going in each direction, solid of cars, just flowing nonstop. And an electric vehicle needs to stop more frequently and stay longer at the pump. And there's just so many cars going down those interstates. If we did do a flash conversion and there was a rapid adoption, 6 Mercedes-Benz Chargers at the Buc-ee's are going to have a queue line of 3 hours. 6 is not enough. You would have to convert those 100 gas pumps into EV chargers times 3 because the dwell time is so much longer and you stop more frequently. So just the raw math, I think, is against us. The fact that an electric vehicle has a longer refuel time and needs to refuel more frequently than a gas car. So that alone means you need more pumps. So my personal opinion is, as long as we don't have any kind of rapid adoption, which I personally think we're on the cusp of as the price continues to drop in electric vehicles, and we're seeing mainstream affordable EVs getting introduced, and people start using these things. So we're not talking about the affluent crew anymore. What we're talking about is the people who are going to Aunt Mabel's for dinner in the city, that's 3 hours away off the interstate, and they need to refuel on the way home, and it becomes commonplace. My personal opinion is we're behind the curve, but I definitely listen to what Eric says, and I tend to agree with his perspective, just because he's been right so many times.
Well, we have a topic for a future video here. Nice job.
Can I see Walter's anecdote and raise him one? So I was talking with an office worker, a coworker, not too long ago, and she was making this big, explanation of this long family trip that she was going to have to do, and she was doing all this planning and how much driving she was going to have to do. And I asked her where she was going, and it turned out that she was going to Fresno. And so for those of you in California know that Fresno is Central California. Leaving from the same office where she works, where she and I work together, Fresno is my first stop in the Chevy Bolt EV. So this big, long, arduous trip that she was talking about taking was literally 200 miles. So I think sometimes we can lose perspective on just how far and how frequently people travel, because we look back at the BTS data. A lot of times they talk about how, hey, look, only about 25% of people even reported making more than one round trip of 300 miles a year. So, if you're dealing with populations that small, it seems big, but when you actually look at them on the road, it's maybe not. They're not traveling as far as frequently as we might think that they are. So,
some few interesting asides to the same line of questioning in the comments here. One is Bill B says stopping free juice will help reduce overcrowding. Yeah, I mean it's a valid point in there that there's folks here who are using those stations purely because they have a complimentary plan, present company included. Trying not to visit when it's packed, but guilty as charged. I will definitely plug in if there's nobody there, and EV go on the other side there in the lyric. So I definitely think there's some artificial inflation of what is there at the moment, but inevitably at some point you're going to have to use fast chargers, and whether it's road tripping or not, Sky points out, he's heard the theory of overbuilding, but road tripping class of big vans and SUVs and obviously trucks and the larger batteries going electric will need those sites for many years to come. And then I think intersection of this, although it's not necessarily, well, both Platform Fanatic here and Mike Mahan make the same point about level 2. Really need to step up level 2 charging game for apartments and street side parking, and in places where the dwell time fits, and faster L2. So I think there's some good points there, and it dovetails back to our conversation with Nathan at It's Electric that DC fast charging is a bit of a crutch in some cases here. We lean on it because there is nothing else there, or because we have free plans, or because if you think somebody is low, why are they low? In some cases it's because they're on a big long trip and are at their 200th mile and need to charge desperately to do the next 200. In other cases it's because they're topping off while grocery shopping, because they're local and forgot to charge at home or couldn't charge at their hotel, or a bunch of different things and use cases where we can potentially use other types of charging to mitigate some of the demand for fast charging.
And I would bring this up too, though, is there is a bit of an escalation going on, and we're coming out of a period where the typical distance between charging stops is only about 100 to 120 miles. A lot of times in EVs that only have 200 miles of range on the freeway to begin with, and we're really getting more into an era where people aren't traveling in e-trons anymore. They're traveling in Cadillac Lyrics. And now instead of getting 160 to 180 miles on a full battery, you're getting 280 to 300 miles. So we're also seeing an escalation in range, right? And so the more that range increases, the more your reliance on public charging away from home decreases. So there are other factors that I foresee coming that will have an impact. So it'll be interesting.
I think we've got an entire podcast. Nice work. I do want to make sure I cover a question that is raised here. It's not just Leonard, but it's also Patrick had asked me in an email to talk about the pricing of DC fast charging. I think this links it quite nicely. So Leonard says there has to be a reckoning with utilities. They will need to find a way to interface with CPOs and charge a fair price for themselves to make money as well as CPOs. Walter, you've covered as well as your reporting on the expansion, you're now tracking some of the pricing at these stations, specifically Pilot Flying J, because they seem to have some interesting trends going on. Patrick had asked me about why, he takes the opposite view. There's a lot of obviously hullabaloo when prices go up. Everybody's going to moan about that, and inflation is a hot topic. But at the same time, Patrick was pointing out to me that we need to make money on these things. They have to be, DC fast charging should be more expensive than your home charging, certainly, but also your level 2 options to create that profit for the site owner, and also just to make sure that people know it's for that reason, for the road trips, for the when you really need it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of pricing, and then your own view on where pricing for DCFC should settle compared to other types of charging, maybe.
Yeah, I think the federal government should completely fund it. We should all be free.
Nice. The European way. Fantastic.
There you go, right?
What could go
wrong? Yeah, so the concept of having a business model where you're selling electrons for profit, I think is going to be a tough row to hoe. I think the C-store business model where they have calibrated the amount of dwell time in the store and how many milkshakes and hot dogs are sold and what their profit margin is on those makes much more sense. And if you're a private CPO and you're not operating a C-store, perhaps have a food truck and you rent space to the food truck or something along those lines. There's a lot of different options, but I think the concept of actually selling electricity for a profit is going to be a difficult thing to do. However, I see some people trying to accomplish it. And as you say, Pilot Flying J is definitely on the cusp of price gouging. I don't really know exactly the economics behind what they're charging, but there's been some downward shift. The winds are definitely blowing towards a lower cost for that particular network. And we're also told that soon General Motors vehicles are going to be getting discounts on it. So it'll be similar to the Tesla Supercharger, I'm assuming, where non-members will be paying a premium, and you could opt in and pay a monthly payment or be a native General Motors customer and get a discount. So the pricing model, I think, is going to be unsettled versus what we pay for gasoline for at least a couple of years. I'm not really sure what the end game is going to be, whether or not government regulators will get involved or not. But right now, you can charge as much as you want. And I see a lot of people charging very exorbitant prices, but I also see other people who are charging next to nothing, basically below cost, as far as I could tell.
I mean, I do think there's a need for these businesses to tie their margins in with whatever they're selling, right? Fast food, convenience stores, right? Just you're trying to get bodies in the door, which from a business perspective can allow you to do what Walter was just saying about selling electricity at cost, right? But one thing that I've also foresee is this being offset in the future by incentivizing solar panel installations. So if you're selling electricity as a service and you're also able to generate a portion of that electricity on site, it allows you to be a lot more competitive. I ran some models of ROIs on DC fast charging sites and what they could sell power for. And at the going rate for electricity, if you were to install a 20 kilowatt solar array at a Pilot Flying J, and just do pure pass through and charge them what your standard rates are, you're looking at an ROI for that solar installation of less than a year, which is just, and that's not counting any other incentives or discounts, right? So you're going to see a lot of these sites, I think, offsetting their power consumption from the grid and essentially selling electricity direct to customers from on-site or locally sited solar panels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a terrific point. Being able to be in a model where your business is electricity and generate it yourself. You get your ROI a lot quicker.
I think that's going to be key for some of these sites that maybe don't have the convenience store or the retail aspect to lean on as well. Because if you're installing these as a city or a municipality, you have a certain amount of, while we don't want it to be free, we certainly want there are side benefits to people coming to your town and spending money, and there can be a broader it attracts visitors, and we're doing our job in that sense. If you're a utility or you're just a site owner who can't really measure the, sorry, my cat's going to have her say now as well. You've got the cat picture, I've got the real cat. Yeah, I think in that case, that demand response side is going to become pretty big, because you may be in a place where you're putting batteries in, you may be in a place where you're generating your own power, and aside from the immediate value there of avoiding demand charges and making that much more predictable expense, every month, being able to pay back and get money for that stored energy is going to be a big piece of the puzzle for anyone who can't make it back elsewhere. But I think you're also going to want to have, to Walter's point, the chains that are spending so much money on this, not wanting to see what PFJ's capital expenditure looks like on these 40 or 50 sites under construction.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think what they do is they foot the bill for the canopy, and GM foots the bill for the chargers, and EVgo does the back end. And just to answer a comment, Guy Malcolm is asking about the membership. EVgo memberships do not apply to these locations, but if you're a GM customer, because their name is branded over here, there are going to be discounts extended to you at these locations. So a little bit of a distinction.
Yeah. And that is a confusing point. Probably the biggest issue with EVgo as a CPO is their confusing pricing models. So yeah, I hear that a lot. Non-GM EV owners pulling into Pilot Flying J and saying, well, I have a membership. Why am I paying 60, 70 cents a kilowatt hour?
Yeah.
And kind of emphasizing that convenience store importance of that revenue stream. Marlin says the Convenience Store Business Association, also called NACS, which is, another naming convention issue, is pushing members to install charging, and Chase follows up. The advantages of C-stores entering the DC fast charging space is that they don't make money on gas. Traditionally, it's the upsell of things like hot dogs and that they sell at store. Yeah, exactly. And although I know we're not fans necessarily, folks aren't fans of apps and the charging, accessing charging through apps, I think there is a pretty robust future in designing apps and also maybe in-car systems eventually that connect your charging session to the provider, right? So if Pilot Flying J is providing these things, but they can also link that up to, I know people don't want to give away their data, but a lot of people will give away a lot for not very much. So maybe if you get a free coffee or if you get one of those free hot dogs, you'll be willing to tie it into the loyalty of that app or the program that in your vehicle eventually allows you to order something while you're charging. That starts to become pretty powerful in terms of a commerce play, because data is king, and you really want to have that customer data and potential loyalty if you're able to get it from EV charging where you couldn't from the pump.
Yeah, and I will say one of the long-term impacts of the NEVI program, because these people are receiving federal funds for DC fast charger builds, I think they'll see, as you say, data is king in those environments. They have it honed to a fine decimal point how to increase sales at a given location. And when they see that when these stores that have DC fast chargers are operating at 20% above the ones that are not, light bulbs are going to turn on. They're going to be like, well, let's do the rest of them. So I do think the NEVI program is not a end solution, but it very likely will be a catalyst.
And honestly, I don't know that the confusion around these different membership programs is ever going to go away, right? Because we see it right now with gas card rewards and supermarket rewards and retailer rewards cards, right? Everybody has their, can I get your phone number when you're at the checkout? And, they create a profile for you. So I don't know that it's going to get any less confusing. But I do think that automakers themselves are going to need to be involved, because to me, the biggest attraction of everybody moving to auto charge or plug-in charge is this idea that you have to have an account with all of these different CPOs. And that's just not going to be appetizing for the average American who just wants to pull in wherever it's convenient, doesn't necessarily care about corporate affiliation, and they want to refuel their car and use the on-site services. And if we're going to push down that road of no payment at the point of sale, it's going to have to be handled by the automakers like Ford is doing, Mercedes is doing, I think, at least in Europe, where they're just combining all of these different network accounts and creating a single customer interface through their driver portal with that particular automaker.
Okay, I think we have covered everything. Mike Mahan has already had the run off to tennis. We've pushed him that long, so thanks for joining us, Mike, if you are still watching us as you run out the door, and good luck in your game. Work on that swing. I think we've covered pretty much everything. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything in the comments. Was there anything that you guys saw that you wanted us to pick up on before we finish up? Doesn't seem to be.
I don't think so. No, we did a pretty good job of covering the bullets this week.
Okay, fabulous. And I'm definitely going to make sure I take the last 20 minutes or so of comments, because I think it's going to feed the topic of whether Eric's prediction at that 75 to 80% is viable or not.
Crazy Eric.
Crazy postman, crazy Eric. Just some closing down ones here. So Sky says transparency and pricing will hopefully drive prices down and simplify them. EVgo and Tesla are particularly tricky for sure. Although I think there's something to be said, and I will still argue the case for time of use rates and trying to shift demand. I think that's valuable. It just has to be very carefully balanced with making sure your rate sheet doesn't confuse drivers to the point that they don't come to your station. Leonard foresees a full cross-network plug-and-charge. Someday my Tesla account will bill for my EVgo usage. Definitely get roaming across EVgo to ChargePoint and certain others on the smaller end. So I don't see that being something that would be a showstopper. It just has to take everybody to come on board and actually make it happen.
So Alex actually just asked a question too. We've and Walter also got another story on this too, and we've kind of seen two conflicting opinions. But according to a Teslarati article that I had read, that they claim to have spoken to someone within GM that they're anticipating sometime in summer. So that could be another 3 months. And they did apparently withdraw all of their adapter purchases. So, and, you know, Walter can speak to that too, because I think he had his adapter order revoked. So,
and well, it did, but I think I'm still going to have the price honored, from what I understand from the subsequent press release, that although I got an order in for a $25 adapter, they're saying no, that's wrong. But because you got an order in, I'll still get a $25 adapter. So.
Good deal. Free charging and $25 access to the surcharges.
There you go.
Yeah. So best we have is 3 months. Probably is the best guess right now.
Okay. Thank you everybody for joining us. Really good topics again, and I think we did our best to cover most of them. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. I haven't completely firmed up the guest yet, but I think we'll be talking a lot about fast charging in the West, and maybe even coming on to Eric's topic of, are we overbuilding? Is it best to overbuild, or have we gone too far already? In the meantime, thank you for your comments and participation in the chat. Thank you, Eric, who is at the News Coolum channel. You'll find all these links down in the description and in the comments. Eric's got some good videos coming out about the sites around him, and Walter is doing sterling work on a weekly basis at the Network Architect channel to update us on DC fast charging sites across the country, Pilot Flying J's progress, and anything else that you can think of in the DCFC space. So thank you, gentlemen, for keeping us on track, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Thank you.